welcome everyone to the last panel of the Pacific Offshore Wind Summit. We made it. Please give a round of applause to everyone working behind the scenes today to make this all happen. They're doing an amazing job. So to get things started for this panel, I have compiled updates from around the world over the last year into this report summarizing global progress in floating wind. I think it'll be presented in a minute. That's because while we've been facing some stiff headwinds in the US, other global markets are making great progress on offshore wind to strengthen their energy security and meet their clean power goals. Floating wind is a relatively new industry for most countries, and building an industry from the ground up, or from the seafloor up in our case, hold for laughs, is complex with many moving parts. Luckily, other countries developing offshore wind are working on similar things to what we need to work on, including permitting, community engagement, procurement, private and public investment, transmission and ports build out, environmental impacts, supply chain, and technology. So it's important to take note of the progress in other places to learn from it and collaborate with groups moving things forward in other parts of the world. So, on that note, we have some experts here today who can discuss this progress, so I will allow them to introduce themselves, and we'll just go down the line.
Amazing, thank you. So I'm Tonicha Pinnock. I work for the UK government based in the British Consulate in San Francisco, and I lead our climate diplomacy work across the West Coast. And what that essentially means is working with subnational governments and industry in order to further our shared climate and energy objectives. So just to touch on what that means for the UK, so we've got legally binding net zero targets, and we've also recently set new targets to achieve clean power by 2030. And our offshore wind sector is going to be absolutely crucial in order to get there. It's a sector we're very proud of, and I was pleased to hear a few shout-outs to the UK throughout the day as well, which was always nice. It's the biggest offshore wind market in Europe and the second in the world after China. We've got 30 gigawatts of capacity, either operational or in the pipeline, and we're aiming for 50 gigawatts by 2030. But the offshore wind sector, we don't see it as just central for our net zero objectives, but also for growth. So the offshore wind sector in the UK is projected to support over 100,000 jobs by 2030 and add over 20 billion to the UK economy by 2030 as well. So really excited to be here for this important conversation.
Good afternoon. My name is Larry Wang, VP of Ming. Ming is global leading wind turbine OEM. We are listed in London Stock Exchange and Shanghai Stock Exchange simultaneously. We are #1 in offshore wind turbine delivery, annual installation in past couple of years. In China, the total offshore cumulative installation is around 50 gigawatt. We have 20 gigawatt is from Mingyang, around 40% market share. We are also a leader of floating wind turbine. Currently in China, there are 5 floating projects. 4 of them use Mingyang turbine, and 1 is very unique. That is only 1 in this world. That is the wind turbine and the floater are designed, produced, and built, invested by 1 company, by Mingyang. This morning, there's a lot of discussion. One banker talked about the risk. There's a risk from wind turbine. There's a risk from floater. There's a lot of risk. By integrated solution, the risk will be reduced. And there's no interface between floater and wind turbine. And also the coupling between the wind turbine and the floater are improved. Also, there's no point finger between floater and the wind turbine. This morning, chair of CEC introduced in his presentation that Mingyang will launch 50 megawatt floating wind turbine, 50. That one turbine will be built this year. Early next year, we'll build floater, and the 50 megawatt floating turbine will be launched the end of next year. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dominique Roddier. I'm the CEO of Ocergy. Ocergy is a technology developer. The other developer in the room is Seth, and he's with PPI, which I founded in 2007, so I've been doing this for quite a long time. Ocergy has two products. One is what we call the Ocergy Wind, which is really focused on the next phase, industrialization. And then the other product that we have is the Ocergy Data. We were not very clever with the names. And that's small, it's a big buoy that is meant to gather environmental and biological data. And that's to be able to do those projects better. Data is cheap, and if you can save on engineering, because you get the better data, then you can actually get to large projects. So really what we're doing at Ocergy is we're focusing on how do we get to the 1 gigawatt scale projects. So we'll talk more about that.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Wang. I'm a law professor at UCLA. My area of research is I look at Chinese environmental governance, climate governance, environmental governance. Lately, I've gotten interested in this topic of the law and geopolitics of clean technology supply chains, which plays a role in kind of our ability to sort of deploy clean technologies around the world. In the past, I've worked on a lot of collaborative projects with Chinese universities and institutions. In the past, it was usually the case where on the Chinese side, they were learning from California experience or American experience, be it on energy efficiency or pollution control or climate change. But these days, there are certain areas in which China has moved ahead, and offshore wind is one of those. Right now, China has over 50% of global capacity. The U.S. has less than 1%. So I think there are some things to at least to pay attention to in the Chinese experience. I'm working with the California-China Climate Initiative right now on a white paper on Chinese policy that supported their rapid growth of offshore wind. The last thing I'll say is today I ran into a group of UCLA undergrads here who represent the UCLA Wind Club. So they're here trying to absorb experience, and given the length of these project timelines, we'll need their support and leadership in 2045. So share your knowledge with them, and then they'll be closing the deal with us in 20 years. So I'll just say that much for now. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. So I'm going to start us off with a question that I'll ask for an answer from each of you, and we can go in reverse order to mix things up. So what is the most significant development of floating wind in the last year globally from each of your perspectives, and how can California benefit or learn from this development? Alex?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll speak from the Chinese policy perspective. On floating wind right now, there are about 5 or 6 projects in China that have come online since 2021 as demonstration projects. So China has about 50 or 60 megawatts of floating, so third after Norway and the UK, ahead of France, Portugal, and Japan. A couple of big things that are kind of driving the move towards floating. In the last 5-year plan in China, there was a push to move farther out and into deeper waters, so-called kind of deep and far seas. They designated as 30 kilometers and 30 meters deep, but companies are looking to go further. I recently heard a presentation from a representative of the China Three Gorges company, which does a lot of offshore wind. And they talked about challenges, sort of insufficient data about marine conditions, transmission challenges, uncertainties about the floating technology, difficult construction conditions, these sorts of things. But the sense was that from his perspective, these were things that they were working out and proceeding very quickly on. So I think that's something to watch out for, to see how China resolves these, what sort of conflicts they have, disputes they have. The overall picture on China right now, they have just started their next 5-year plan, the 15th 5-year plan, and they've targeted about 10 gigawatts of offshore wind deployment a year. Last fall, an industry group had sort of made a private pledge that they're targeting 15 gigawatts a year, so we'll see where it falls. We should expect to see massive offshore wind deployment continue in the Chinese context over the next few years.
Thank you. Dominique, from your perspective?
So I looked at it from how many wind turbines can we install. So really in terms of the projects. And France combined AO9 and AO10 into 10 gigawatt. 5 of them would be floating. Auctions are due by the end of the year. AR8 was accelerated by 8 milliband a little bit when you look at the details, but still, that was important. Utsira in Norway was announced. So that's 2 projects of 100 megawatt. And then Korea, the auctions where there was 400 megawatt to be bidded in floating, and CIP bid 1.1 gigawatt, and Ocean Wind 300, so it's 1.4 gigawatt instead of 400 megawatt. So really a lot of near-term projects where people are going to be doing RFIs and RFQs on technology. Then the other thing to give credit to is 2 big projects were installed this year, FlowGen and EFGL. EFGL was my project. I've got something for it, but it's awesome to see that, to see still in the water. And maybe just on a personal note, our pilot will be installed next month in the middle of the North Sea. So it's still in the water, and that's important.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. And Larry, you spoke a little bit previously about the 50 megawatt turbine that Ming is developing, but can you talk about the biggest development in that regard for floating wind and maybe how it applies to California?
Sure. The 51 actually is the second phase. Our first 16.6 is one floater with twin turbine like this, like V-shape. Mm-hmm. The first one we already have in operation for more than 1 year, and proved by so many typhoons. I even lost count. And we are unfortunate in South China Sea. We are in the center of typhoon. There's so many typhoons, and our project worked very well. 16.6. That is one of our big achievement in the floating history. And also last year we officially announced that we will develop the 50 megawatt floating. It's similar. It's just bigger. It's one floater. We ship 2 wind turbines, 25 each of them, and the 25 megawatt turbine will be built this year.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Tonicha?
Amazing, thank you. So yeah, I'll focus on it from the UK's perspective. So the UK has one of the most mature floating offshore wind markets in the world, alongside France. So we have 2 operational floating offshore wind farms. So we have Hywind, which was the world's first floating offshore wind farm, and then we also have Kincardine, and they are both based up in Scotland. And together those projects produce about 80 megawatts of power. So the challenge now really is scaling. And there's been 3 kind of key developments, I'd say, in the last year in the UK in that regard. So first, in the UK's floating offshore wind pipeline. So in January, the UK had its largest auction round in Europe's history, and that included fixed and floating offshore wind. And together that secured enough power to power 12 million homes. That auction, then combined with previous leasing rounds as well, sets us up for gigawatt scale flow deployment this decade, which is very exciting. And then the second development, I'd say, is the UK's investment in its domestic manufacturing. So in June last year, we released our industrial strategy, and that commits the UK to double its clean energy investment to 30 billion a year by 2035. And offshore wind and floating offshore wind is absolutely central to that. So the UK has invested 64 million in Port Talbot to make that a floating offshore wind hub in the UK. And then finally as well, we had a very exciting announcement in February. The UK and 8 European countries committed to create the world's largest clean power hub. So we're aiming to build up to 100 gigawatts of shared offshore wind capacity by 2030 through accelerating cross-border offshore wind energy and increasing grid integration.
That's awesome. Yeah. The UK has really set set a standard in terms of government involvement. So I'll just skip to Dominique to change up the order a little bit. Dominique, you've been a real innovator in developing offshore wind technology. Where do you see floating offshore wind development moving forward in the next year or few years?
So the first thing that we did was we had to prove that we can make the turbine spin on the floater. That wasn't given, and so that's a lot of the pilots that we've seen. And then what we had to do is we had to prove that we can bank finance projects, provided that the subsidies were big enough, because all of the projects that are in Europe right now all had some type of subsidies. What we're doing today is remove the subsidies, do bigger projects, reduce the cost, and make project commercial. And what I mean by that is, getting out of the FID room with a yes from your investors, move on with the project. And that's about cost reduction across the board. And so a lot of things are happening in that area.
That's great. So I'm going to jump to Alex. China is the world's leading offshore wind market, with over half of the world's 15,000 operating offshore wind turbines located in China. We don't have much visibility into what's going on in China to activate this development. So what can you tell us about China's progress that can inform California's policymakers, advocates, and industry leaders to move offshore wind forward here?
Sure, thank you. So I appreciated the commissioner this morning asking the audience to take the long view and sort of the stay the course message and think, this takes some time. And it's worth thinking back on how long it's taken China to get from zero to essentially where they are at this point. So China's first initial pilot projects were in 2007, 2009, so roughly a 20-year period. In about 2010, China had about the same amount of offshore wind that the US has today, right? And then really when the growth that exploded was really only 10 years ago. So after 2015, in significant part due to a feed-in tariff that was provided to support development. Until today, where China is now greater than 50% of global offshore wind. What were the elements that allowed China to do this? From the policy perspective, there are a couple of things that are worth pointing out, right? So one is simply starting back 20 years ago, there was a decision to start implementing kind of long-term policy, long-term targets for renewable energy in general, and then among those things, offshore wind. There was a renewable energy law passed in around 2006. I can talk about the motivations for that, but again, China operates on these 5-year plans. Every year they sort of deepen the targets, continue these targets through the years. These targets matter because in China's large bureaucracy, these targets are sort of assigned and distributed amongst governors and mayors, and their political fortunes can be affected by their performance on these targets, state-owned enterprises as well. So that sort of system was driving things forward and provided this long-term policy signal. There were sort of different attempts to price these things, right? My understanding is that the initial bids on these things often led to sort of cutthroat pricing among developers where they bid too low and the projects didn't really get off the ground. But then with this feed-in tariff, it supported developers, and then there was a real boom after 2015. And there was a huge spike in 2021 because China decided it was going to phase out the feed-in tariff for projects approved by 2018 and finished by 2021. So there was a sort of unprecedented spike in developers trying to clamor and finish their projects in 2021. After 2021, the idea was to move to more kind of parity pricing with other types of technologies. But some of the provinces still provided subsidies as a sort of bridge to kind of get through, and they sort of had subsidies that would ramp down year over year. And the provinces that did this had probably the most active provinces, like where Ming is very active in Guangdong province in the south, and another province on the east, Jiangsu province, are the biggest provinces. And in addition to these targets, there was substantial industrial policy, right, of the types of things you saw in the Inflation Reduction Act, but you sort of had had subsidies of various sorts, you had local content requirements, you had cheap financing especially for the state-owned enterprises. In particular, you had kind of cross-subsidies for a variety of other aspects of the ecosystem. So cross-subsidies for steel, I mean, think of that as essentially sort of the opposite of what we're facing now with the tariffs on steel in the United States, right? And subsidies for things like shipbuilding, advanced manufacturing, all these types of things that provided a lot of support even beyond that feed-in tariff. And then the other area was that this was viewed as very much part of a broader industrial policy, like an economic policy, rather than really primarily as a climate policy. And so among other things, some provinces competed to become sort of major industrial clusters. I hope Mr. Wang will talk about the one that Ming works in, which is, by all accounts, a very impressive sort of soup to nuts, vertically integrated. You can build the whole thing, put it in the water, take it out to the coast. And that's something that's developed, to my understanding, really in the last 10 years, sort of a fishing village that had low-end manufacturing, then sort of re-envisioned itself as an advanced green manufacturing place. So I'll stop there, but I think that story, and we can talk in a moment about potential lessons for California. I think there are obviously limits to your ability to directly adopt practices from other countries, especially with a governance system as different in China as it is in the United States. But I think there are high-level lessons we can take from what's happened in China.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. That's very helpful and promising, given at least California's steadfast support of offshore wind. And yeah, very promising. So, Larry, since Alex talked a bit about the government side, since you're a technology expert, can you talk a bit about China's progress and the vertical integration and how maybe California can benefit from that, the lessons learned there?
Ming truly believes that floating is the future of offshore wind. We truly believe that floating will be cheaper than fixed bottom. Only floating has the potential to be mass production is the key. Fixed bottom cannot. Besides that, we also develop a very good O&M technology to heavily reduce the OPEX. For example, the problem currently on the O&M for the fixed bottom is that 20, 30 kilometers away from the coast, when there's something wrong, we need to consider wind window, and also the wave window. It's not like onshore, it's very challenging. But for floating, the concept we developed is that we have an actual turbine. When someone in the field has problem, tow this one, unplug, plug in, and tow the bad one back to the port. When you come back to the port, everything will be quicker, cheaper, easier. So we truly believe that floating will be the future and will be cheaper. And mass production actually is invented in this country more than 100 years ago. Ford Model T makes that even ordinary people can afford, can buy a car, which is a luxury. And floating turbine is Model T in offshore wind. And I believe after 100 years, California will choose the floating, which make offshore wind not only generate green power, but also cheaper. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that perspective. That's definitely a fresh perspective that we need to hear in the United States, that floating will one day be cheaper. So turning over to the UK. The UK has paved the way for offshore wind as a leader in the industry for years. So what are some lessons for California from the UK's development?
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, so as I said, it's a market that we're really proud of, but it's one that's really grown rapidly over the last 10 to 15 years. So we had under 5 gigawatts of operational capacity back in 2010, and we're now looking at 17 gigawatts of operational capacity now. So we have definitely learned a lot of lessons along the way. We have actually just produced a report with California on UK lessons on ports specifically, which I'd be very happy to talk to anybody about after this if you're interested. But for the purpose of this question, I'll go a little bit more high level. So yeah, first of all, I'd say the importance of public capital and market design in order to unlock the offshore wind market. So as everyone here knows, the offshore wind industry has incredibly high upfront costs, and some of those returns are often seen in job creation or economic security, which really underlines the importance of direct public investment, which is what the UK has done. So for example, that 64 million grant I said to make Port Talbot a floating offshore wind hub, but also the importance of good regulatory models. So our contracts for difference regulatory model is something which has worked really well for us, and that is a two-sided contract which essentially sets the price of electricity. And if that electricity price, the wholesale electricity price, falls below that, the government will pay the cost back to the generator. And if it goes above that, then the generator will pay that surplus back to the government and, in essence, then the taxpayer as well. And then the second lesson I would say is the importance of flexibility. So our contracts for difference scheme has been very successful, and like I said, we had the most successful auction round in Europe's history. But that has been refined every time that we've done it. We've consulted, we've made changes on the length of the contract and other things. So I think, being really aware of that and being quite dynamic and flexible. And then the third would be on ports, the importance of ports and what kind of critical bottleneck that they can be. So we found in the UK that is really what makes or breaks delivery. It's not really the technology, but it's actually the ports being ready when you need them. And that's particularly important for the floating offshore wind industry, where that's often the kind of first hard constraint that you actually reach is the ports. And when they're kind of late or undersized, then that can, really hamper things.
Yeah, so true. As a follow-up to what you just talked about, can you talk a bit about the focus and rationale behind the UK's impressive drive for offshore wind and, knowing that it now supplies a fifth of the UK's total electricity generation? That's very impressive.
Yeah, so I'd say it's twofold. So on the one hand, we've got our legally binding net zero targets, and we were the first major economy to set those, and that is obviously, that keeps us on track. We've got our Clean Power 2030 target as well. But then the flip side of that, as like I said at the beginning, is that industrial growth angle. The offshore wind industry is revitalizing industries in ports which really needed that boost. So old fishing towns or oil and gas industries, particularly where those skills in engineering really do map over, particularly to the floating offshore wind sector. So I'd kind of say it's twofold from the kind of net zero angle, but also the growth angle as well.
Yeah, that's great. Given that we've heard some advice from a few different perspectives, I'm curious, Dominique, what your advice would be as someone who has worked on multiple deployed floating wind farms or offshore wind farms in general, what your advice would be to those working in the US offshore wind industry to motivate forward progress here?
So with all the pilots, so just single units, we've always learned different things. I mentioned before, we learned how to make the turbine spin on a floater. With this last one, we actually have LDs, performance guarantees, and liquidated damage if we don't perform. This is an inter-stream, so the platform, we proved industrialization, how we're going to build multiple. So really the thing is, small is fast. And you look at the projects in Europe that we have, it's not that many projects, 11 turbines in Norway, 10 in the UK, 9 in France. Small is fast, but really the point is that progress is not how many megawatts you have in your pipeline. progress is how much steel you have in the water. And in California, we have this opportunity today with CADEMO, which is 60 units, 4 turbines. We gotta do this, and we all have to get behind that project. That's how we make progress.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to bring that question to the rest of the group for each of you to answer as well. So whoever wants to start.
Great. Yeah, so if you want to talk about potential lessons from the Chinese policy experience for California, I think the good news is that the lessons I would see are things that California has already begun to do. So I think California's strategy-wise is really on the right path. So I think a couple of things just to mention are, for example, committing to scale and very visible pipelines so that you can sort of draw investors in. This may require the more regional approach that was mentioned earlier, moving beyond just California. Other things like investing early in ports and in the sort of industrial clusters that you need, the supply chain that you need, working on transmission and offshore transmission and the sort of preparation for that. A question is to what extent offshore wind can also be a sort of economic policy for California, that it generates companies in California that then can look to export around the world rather than just as climate policy or as energy policy. The other question is, one cycle that China has already gone through is that they had fairly substantial feed-in tariff subsidies early on, but then they plan to start to ramp it down as costs decrease, but they had the difficult job of trying to figure out how to do it in a way that didn't then stall the pipeline. And I think there was support from the provinces that helped ease the transition into the next phase where things are going more towards market pricing. And then I think to step back, the thing that's worth thinking about is that China's entire push for renewable energy that arguably began 20, 25 years ago began in a period where there was acute worry about energy shortages. So just like there are in the United States now, given the AI boom and that sort of thing. In the Chinese context, it was in the early 2000s. China had just joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. It drove intense investment that caused brownouts kind of all over the country in the early 2000s. I used to work was an attorney for NRDC at that time, working with their China program. That was an invitation for us to bring in things like energy efficiency policy, green building policy, clean transportation policy. It was a way to look at how do you deal with these energy shortages. And so the motivations at that time were not primarily environmental, actually. So they were about energy security. They were about looking for economic opportunities, right? This was an industrial policy to look for opportunities to become world leaders in areas in which, frankly, the rest of the world was kind of divided on promoting renewable energy. So, it was hard for China to, for example, to compete on gas-powered cars, because how are you going to compete with Toyota and Ford and the other companies that have been in it for decades? But you could compete in electric vehicles where there weren't very many incumbents. And so these sorts of drivers, and of course at that time also China was seeing the impact of Middle Eastern conflict. So the Iraq War was going on at that time. And so they realized as a developing country, millions of people were going to start buying cars. If they were all going to buy gas-powered cars, it was going to be a disaster because China was already importing oil. It was going to become the world's largest importer of oil. And it was an energy security play, right? We want to sell cars, we want to be a world leader in cars, and we don't want to have to be relying on Middle Eastern oil. So all of those dynamics were there, and there was a little bit of a deja vu right now that we're seeing kind of globally. And so we're kind of in a crazy political moment with offshore wind, as we know, but hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll return to sort of a pragmatic, sensible policy that really supports national interests.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Larry, yeah, go ahead.
All right. I'm not saying that California should copy policy from China, from UK. California is different. I like to share my observation, the difference between California and China. I like to share. So one thing is that China has 50 gigawatt offshore installation, fixed bottom. With that huge amount, there's a lot of things already built. This morning, a lot of people, panel talk about training part, that is already there. So the floating can share those facilities, the training, the cable, the industry, supply chain. But California, this is different. California floating has no other big brother to share. So this is the one difference out of my observation I like to share with everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Yeah, go ahead, Tonicha.
Saying thank you. Yeah, so I guess maybe to summarize my last answer, I'd say focusing on coordination, predictability, and trust just as much as the engineering and the technology. I think we've done well as the UK because we created those stable policy frameworks and we focused on coordination. I mean, we've learned a lot of things along the way. I'm not saying that that was how it always was to begin with. But I think that's really been key. And I think I'd also say that while hopefully we have lots of lessons to share, we also are looking to California to have lots of lessons from you as well. Yeah, I mean, the size and scale of California and the innovation ecosystem here is kind of unparalleled. So it's exciting to work together on it.
Agreed, yes. So we have a few minutes left, which is very exciting, because this panel really echoes a lot of things that we've heard throughout the day today, things that California needs to focus on, which is affirming to hear from other countries that are a bit ahead of us, that those are things that we indeed need to be focusing on. So just wanted to give you each a chance. You have like a minute each, less than a minute each, to share any final thoughts. Yeah. You can go. You can start if you want.
Yeah, I guess I'll just reiterate. You know, right now the state of play is simply that the U.S. is really far behind on offshore wind. Right, Europe has about 45% of total capacity. China has about 50%, and a number of other countries are really starting to come up quickly. And so I think, you know, California is used to being a leader on the environment and on energy, and I think is very smartly putting in the policies that will make it a leader in this area. There are obviously headwinds from the federal government right now, but I see every reason to think that we will meet these targets, that our UCLA students will be in the game helping us in 10 or 20 years, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do.
Agreed. Thank you.
So we talked a lot about the current administration and the setbacks and things like that. It's been going up and down, you know, the floating wind, but it's never been so aggressive against us. And the reason is because they feel threatened. And there's a reason for that. It's because we have an industry. It makes sense. And that's why they're fighting so hard. But we will win. We will prevail.
Love that.
Certainly, California is late in this game. But latecomer have some advantage. One of the advantages is that there are solutions from Europe. There are different solutions, independent, different solutions from Chinese market are totally different. Different methodology, different OEM, different foundation, installation. So you have choice. Lesson learned also. My suggestion is that open to international technology. Certainly, we need to consider national security, cybersecurity, local content, create more jobs locally, support local economy, but open to international technology. Thank you.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Amazing. I can see we're against the clock, so I'll be quick. But yeah, I think just to underline that point exactly, just that we've done so much internationally, and you don't there's a lot of lessons to share, and things like today are extremely helpful in order to kind of start that progress. We recently signed a memorandum of understanding with California, and having that kind of framework in order to build on these conversations is incredibly helpful. And just look forward to seeing where it could go.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great note to end on. And we strategically placed this panel at the end of the day to kind of affirm that we're on the right track, as you all are saying, and it'll happen. So thank you all for sticking through the day of panels. It's been a long day, and I'm excited to see you all at Offshore Wind Drinks. So yeah, thank you, and give this panel a hand of applause.